Hi, I'm James Marshall, Republican candidate for House District 84. And today I'm here with David Sanders, who is running for PSC District 5. David, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, thank you, James. I live here in Helena with my wife, Kathy, and my son, Don. We live up in the north part of Helena in the valley there. And I used to be the executive director of the Public Service Commission. I am a fourth-generation Montanan, a third-generation U.S. Army veteran. My dad grew up in Darby, my grandfather grew up in Stevensville, and my great-grandfather started a ditch company, an irrigation ditch company in Hamilton. And I always tell people that I spent a good part of my life in the Washington, D.C. area because my dad's last military assignment was at the Pentagon, where he worked in the office of the U.S. Army's Inspector General. Because of that, I didn't get away with much as a kid. I was raised in a pretty strict U.S. Army STRAC military household. But it was good for me, and I went to college, went to graduate school. Fortunate to have a lot of educational opportunities along the way, and then came out here to Montana actually because my son, who was playing college football at the time that the pandemic rolled around, said, "Look, Dad, I'd like to see what the United States is outside of the Beltway." And I'd like to see the United States as it is before it's while we still can. He was that concerned about the country back then, 2020, 2021, and I said, I like where your head's at. I'm afraid you might be a couple of years too late, but if you want to go to Montana and see what life is like, get in touch with our family roots. That would be great. And then after he was out here for a year or so, he said, Dad, you could, you're used to running large organizations. You could do what you do from anywhere. Why don't you come out here and hang out with me? And if you have a grown son that still thinks you're okay to hang out with, you take that chance 100 times out of 100. So I came to Montana, went to go work for the Public Service Commission, became its executive director, and now I'm the chief of staff in the state auditor's office and also a candidate for the Montana Public Service Commission, where I live here in Helena.
All right. That sounds like a pretty good position you're going to be working your way into there. I can relate. As a child or a kid, I grew up with a father who was a city police officer, mm-hmm. and I couldn't do a U-turn on my bicycle without everybody in town knowing. It was pretty funny. But and in Montana, being the fourth largest state in the union and having such a diverse topography, I grew up in the western part, which is a lot of the trees and mountains and growing up over there, I always thought I had a real grasp on Montana, and then I decided to ride a horse for a while and go work a couple of ranches in central Montana, and really fell in love with it. Yeah. That's like you said. The one ranch I worked on, Charlie Russell himself used to visit the ranch, and so when you've been around that kind of history, it's wonderful.
Well, I believe it was Ronald Reagan who said, "There's nothing better for the inside of a man than the outside of a horse," and I believe that too. In fact, my father was a cavalry officer in the Army, so he was in the last horse cavalry unit in the U.S. Army. He was first cav in World War II under General MacArthur, and rode in a cavalry unit in the Philippines in World War II, and then also served in Japan after the war was over as on MacArthur's general staff when MacArthur was Governor General of Japan, and then later served with MacArthur in Korea, and then served in Vietnam as well. So he had 3 wars under his belt. I was fortunate my Army service did not include any combat, so I was fortunate in that respect. But But I think military service and law enforcement service, I think the people who gravitate to those sorts of careers are the kind of people that are the backbone of this country. So I'm very proud of my military service, certainly proud of my father's, even my grandfather, who was a volunteer in the Spanish-American War, left out of Fort Missoula during the beginning of the Spanish-American War. And your dad, who served in law enforcement, you yourself, who served in the U.S. Coast Guard. I mean, I think that those types of activities, those types of selfless service to country, to community, they're the kinds of service that make for outstanding public servants and outstanding citizens in our republic.
Yeah, and keeping that in mind, I think back at the one ranch I worked on was 12,000 acres, and it still had various old dwellings on it that belonged to some of the original homesteaders. And whenever I'd see those buildings, I always connected with some of my college education in architecture. And in architecture, we'd start off, with the history, which translated to how, humans started off out on the open prairie with only daylight as their working hours. And then from there, we started making fires. So then we developed our communication and storytelling. And then, from there we started to build homes or find dwellings that we could be in. But then we incorporated that fire with chimneys. Now, where I'm heading with all of this is that we've seen a progression in the history of humanity as we have insulated ourselves from the elements. And then once we got beyond that, then things like power became important. Whether it would be, from gas or electricity or those things, and the impact that they had on our societal system. We went from having to spend 4 to 6 hours a day, getting wood ready or packing water, and we started to have more available time to do other things when electricity could kick in and start, heating the house for us and doing those kinds of things. And that's kind of where, I'm heading with all of this today is this week's a big week with Northwestern Energy and its merger with, was that Black Hills, the Black Hills Co-op? Or?
It's called Black Hills Corporation, but the new company will be called something different entirely. It's really, and I'll just give this aside because that's how they've been billing this as a merger. But by any other realistic description, this is a buyout. It is a stock swap buyout of Northwestern Energy by Black Hills Corporation. The new company, I believe, is going to be called Bright Horizons or something like that. And so that rebranding effort is going to take place after or if the merger is approved. And we'll see. I was at the PSC hearings on this earlier this week, and just this week, thousands of pages of documents came in. Some came in earlier, but an additional thousands of pages of documents came into the PSC as part of this application. I mean, it's a stack that stands, a foot or so high off a table if you stack it all up. And the commissioners are going to give this 1 week of hearings, well, not even a full week, Tuesday through today,
yep.
Friday. And they're going to, I can safely tell you that not a single commissioner has read all of the documents that have been presented to them yet. And so to have a hearing on those, they aren't even, most of them, might be an exception, maybe two, that can ask even intelligent questions about the proposal. And most of the questions aren't well informed yet. And so I think if the Public Service Commission would take its time, do its job, apply the proper scrutiny, then they could have a more sensible and logical evaluation of the documents in front of them. But right now, I think this late presentation of thousands of pages of documents to the Public Service Commission just shows a lack of respect for the commission and its role on the part of the applicants. Maybe the current Public Service Commission doesn't deserve that respect because of the way it's been behaving. And we saw evidence of that this week as well.
Well, I know that right now people are really feeling the pinch financially. You know, taxes are up, cost of everything is up. You know, fuel's out of control, and so everyone's looking to what can make life, you know, more affordable again. And one of the things we know historically that changes a society is cheap energy. I mean, that's just where it's at. Mm-hmm. More countries and more people have been brought up out of poverty through cheap energy than any other aspect of humanity. And so I know that in the last couple of years, green energy has been being, you know, pushed quite a bit. And a lot of homeowners have been buying into solar panels and becoming their own private power plant, so to say. And the availability of agreements, you know, between those private power plants and Northwestern Energy have been pretty limited. I myself have my own power plant on my home, and I know when I went to go do that, I was really shocked at what was available to me as far as making an agreement with Northwestern Energy. There's no compensation, you know, for any power that I put into the grid. I'm only credited for what I put in, and then on an annual basis, they determine, you know, what was left they get to keep. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I know that right now everybody's really feeling, you know, the pinch on the cost of all these things, and they were hoping to see alternatives like solar panels as a way to decrease their monthly expenses, or at least kind of take the ebb and flow out of it, especially as time goes on and we're going to see more and more rate increases, or we're seeing, you know, programs where they're changing pricing according to peak hours and things like that. And a lot of times having your own power plant, you know, helps kind of hedge against those additional costs. I think one of the things the voters would like to know or have more insight to in a merger like this is where the private power plants are going to, you know, fall out in the middle of all of this, and if it's just going to continue to become a bigger and bigger monopoly with, you know, less and less say so for the private power plants, or if this could be an opportunity for the homeowners who've made the investment into these to be justly compensated for the amount of power they're putting back into the grid. Do you have a take on that?
Well, there's quite a lot to unpack in your questions there that you just articulated, James. So, first piece, let's talk about affordability. So you're absolutely correct to point out that the cost of electricity, in particular, less so natural gas, because natural gas is much more driven on natural gas supply and availability. But the price of electricity generation for the monopoly regulated utilities, the so-called IOU companies, the investor-owned utilities, the cost there has increased by 39% for those utilities operating in Montana in the last 3 years. So a 39% increase in 3 years averages out to about 13% a year, and that 13% a year has been, over that time period, more than 3 times the rate of inflation. That's not sustainable. And you correctly pointed out in the beginning, in your sort of preamble to your question, you correctly pointed out that American economic prosperity, progress, if you will, on an economic front, on the technological front in the United States has been driven by, I would argue, two things. One, the availability of energy at an affordable rate, so cheap energy, if you will, affordable energy, and also affordable money, because we have a capitalist society. So the ability to raise capital and to pay for that capital either through debt or equity financing. Those are the two things that have driven the U.S. economy, and those are the two things that are imperiled right now. They were imperiled by extraordinarily high and I think artificially high interest rates under Fed Chairman Jerome Powell, who is now thankfully gone and is going to be replaced by, I think, a much more rational, reasonable, more independent and less politically driven Fed chairman than the one we previously had. And I think also on the energy front, and especially in Montana, we just have a Public Service Commission that agrees to rate increase after rate increase after rate increase. So why are energy rates rising in Montana? This is sort of central to the question you asked. And the reason they're raising is because energy rates generally in most states are built on a cost plus pricing model. So they take the cost that it takes to generate that electricity, to build equity in that company, and then they add, in Montana, a 9.65% guaranteed rate of return on that investment. Well, you or I, or anybody here in Montana couldn't go into a bank and say, "Hey, I'm going to loan you some money. Give me a 9.65% guaranteed rate of return." You couldn't go to an investment house and say, "I want a 9.65% guaranteed rate of return." You couldn't go to any bank and ask for that, any investment, any place to do that. But the utilities can do that when they go to the Public Service Commission and they get that return on equity. And that's the important thing here. The return on equity means for the utility, and this gets to the last part of your question, that guaranteed rate of return on equity means that the power company wants to own the equity. So if it's a Yellowstone County generating station, natural gas plant, if it's coal strip 3 and 4, which are still in operation, if it's a hydro dam, if it's a wind turbine, if it's a solar plant, if it's geothermal, whatever the source of energy is, they want to own it. And so when you put solar panels on your roof or at your ranch or on your farm, or when you have your own wind turbine, you're not they call it a QF, a qualified facility. Then they make it very, very difficult to qualify to become a QF, and you can't sell that power back to Northwestern with any reasonable rate of return. They get their guaranteed 9.65%, but you're not going to get that the way the rates are structured now. So how do you change that? And this comes to the real nugget of your question, if you will.
And that's what I'm looking at, as becoming a potential legislator, and looking at the people of my House district. I personally am not the only one who's, over the last 2.5 years, put an additional 9,000 kilowatts back into the grid and received nothing for it.
Right. So in order to be one of those qualified facilities, there are all of these criteria which the large monopoly utility companies have laid out with the Public Service Commission and in law in some cases. And so it becomes very, very difficult to do that on a one-off, one family, one farmer, it becomes very, very hard for them to do it, to meter it, to make sure that frankly, it becomes not worth it for most people. So what they want to do is they want to force you back into their generating capacity into their generating space, and then they want to bill you for it because that gives them that guaranteed 9.65% rate of return. And even if it falls below that for whatever reason, for unforeseen costs or whatever, the Public Service Commission just puts that back into the rate. So how do you solve that? My solution for that is for the Public Service Commission of Montana to take a very, very serious look at performance-based rate making. If you base this on performance, if a power company is supposed to supply power to the people on the basis of it being safe, of that power being affordable, of the grid being resilient, of the grid being secure, of all of these things taking place, then let's performance-base the rates, not just make it so there's cost plus pricing, because even you saw this last rate case, which, by the way, and our viewers should know this, because I think the Public Service Commission has tried to almost intentionally obfuscate this issue. But that last rate case that Northwestern has was never, there was never a final rule that was voted on by the members of the commission. The staff at the PSC knows this. The commissioners know this. So what they did is some people at the Public Service Commission, a couple of the commissioners and a couple of the staff decided they were going to extrapolate how the members might have voted on this final rate case based on things that they said and amendments that were made during the rate case on the subordinate amendments. And then because they never produced a final rule that was revealed to the public and revealed to the commissioners even, they just decided, well, and they took one commissioner's vote and changed it from a no to a yes. So the rate could pass 3 to 1 to 1, rather than what it really was, which would have been 2 to 2 to 1, which means the rate increase would have failed.
And what was the time frame? What was the year on that? Was that the 23 to the 24 year?
2025. Because I know that just happened this last December.
Because I know from 2023 to 2024, they had gone from 191 million to 224 million. Mm-hmm. So they had seen an increase of $30 million, and that was net income. That's pretty sizable.
It is pretty sizable, and this was even more egregious, and most of this centered around the Yellowstone County generating station, the natural gas plant in Laurel. And so what they did is Northwestern Energy had originally applied for pre-approval for that plant when they were first thinking of building it. They withdrew that application from pre-approval, so the PSC would never get to vote on it. And then they just decided to go ahead and build the plant. And the plant ended up being much more expensive than they thought it was going to be. And there were cost overruns and delays in getting the plant up and running. And so the plant actually, I think it started like 6, 8, 9 months later than was originally forecast. And all of those costs that went into those overruns, there were members of the commission who voted to just give the money to Northwestern for the cost overruns. One of those commissioners was Ann Bukacek, and that's my opponent, and that's one of the reasons why I'm running against her. In fact, not only did she vote to put all of that money back into rate base, she made a motion to increase the rate base by an additional $16.3 million that she was taking from the expense line on Northwestern's property and loss statement, and she was putting that on the backs of Montana ratepayers, or that was her intention. Fortunately, she didn't get even a sufficient second for that motion. And so her effort to take $16.3 million from Montana ratepayers and stick it into the bank account of Northwestern Energy failed. But other efforts that she's made to stuff money into the pockets of Northwestern executives have passed, and that's been to the detriment of Montana ratepayers and our economy.
Yeah, and that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at things through the eyes of the people from House District 84. And we're locked in with Northwestern Energy. I think on the western border we might be close, where some residences are serviced by Vigilante Electric Co-op.
Right.
And I know that's been a big bone of contention, co-ops versus, your for-profits. I believe like right now Northwestern Energy is around, 13 cents, 13.08 or something like that, 05 on a kilowatt hour. And Vigilante is at like, 9.5, 9.8, somewhere in there.
Right.
And but Northwestern Energy is servicing 422,000 people. So almost 1/3 of the state. We're
customers. Right.
Yeah, customers. We're Vigilante is only servicing I believe around 9,200, 11,000.
Sounds about
yeah,
right.
It's somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah.
And I know taxpayers, like I said, the people of House District 84, when they come across those numbers, they're like, why? Why is this like this? Why is it the little guy, the co-op, can provide electricity, at that rate, and yet the larger one, if I'm not mistaken, Northwestern Energy owns the hydroelectric. They own a lot of those sources where they're getting their power from.
Well, not only that, because it's easy for them to own it because they made the people of Montana pay for that hydroelectric power generation twice. So they originally paid for it when it was Montana Power.
I was looking that up in 1890 up to 1912 when Montana Power acquired
and then after
those.
the great deregulation debacle, which happened mostly under former Governor Mark Roscoe's term of office, and he's really gone off the deep end since then in terms of his political views. But I will tell you that the co-ops do a good job of providing electricity, and I think a better job of governance than we're seeing from the monopoly owned utilities, and their captive ratepayers are just being held hostage right now. And you correctly point out that this so-called merger, which I point out is no merger at all. This is just a
money grab.
It's a power grab as well, and
yes,
literally,
sure.
not just in terms of generating capacity, but a power grab in terms of political power. They want to have market power, which is economic power, and they want to have political power throughout the Midwestern United States. Montana, you point out, is 422,000 customers for Northwestern, but if you look at that across the other 7 states where the combined company is planning to do business, Montana becomes a much smaller fraction of a power company that is supplying power in South Dakota, in Nebraska, in Iowa, in Arkansas, in all of these other states.
So we'd even further lose our voice and our will in all of this.
We do, and we've lost a lot of it with the squabbling of the Public Service Commission that's gone on. I was going to point this out, and I will point it out because it happened this week. So, I'll back up to last week. Last week, 3 members of the Montana Public Service Commission, the president, President Wellborn, the vice president, Vice President Fielder, and another backbench member, my opponent, Ann Bukacek, they voted to make sure that the former president, Brad Molnar, could not come in the building for the hearing on the Northwestern Black Hills combined company. And that was for this week. They wanted to make it so he would have to participate. If he wanted to participate, he would have to participate remotely. Even though 1/5 of the people of Montana voted for him to be a public service commissioner, their vote was to disenfranchise 1/5 of the people of Montana and disenfranchise a duly elected commissioner, Commissioner Molnar. I think, honestly, because he was asking too many hard questions about the potential combined company.
I know that every time I start asking questions, every time it gets thrown into my face, how inexpensive electricity here is in Montana.
Yeah,
Versus other states, they're like, oh, I don't know what you're upset about. We're one of the least expensive, states for electricity.
So,
And I'm sitting there looking at it though, as a consumer, as a taxpayer. I'm also trying to look at it, like I said, through the eyes of the constituents in House District 84. That it's like, it doesn't matter if it's cheaper somewhere else.
It's not the case. It
has to be relative to what it's costing here.
And it's not the case in House District 84.
Mm-hmm.
When you're trying to represent your constituents in House District 84. And what's happening is because House District 84 is mostly served by one of the monopoly regulated utilities and only maybe a little bit by one of the co-ops. Co-op power in Montana is much cheaper than the power that's being offered by the monopoly regulated utilities with their guaranteed 9.65% rate of return.
Mm-hmm.
So you're absolutely on the right track. This nonsense, people pass out, something that says, "Oh, Montana power is so cheap." Well, it should be cheap. We're a power-rich, abundant state. We are a net exporter of energy in this state, and we should be. We have hydro, we have coal, we have natural gas, we have plenty of wind. We have plenty of solar. We have plenty of all of these potential sources of electricity. There is going to be put into Montana, up in Great Falls. I was there last night. They are going to be deploying small modular nuclear reactors to provide safe, reliable, and affordable nuclear power and secure nuclear power to power the Malmstrom Air Force Base and our battery of Sentinel missiles, which are going to be coming in to protect this country from intercontinental ballistic missile attack. So that's happening. Montana is a resource-abundant state. We are an energy-rich state. And so for somebody to say, well, our power is cheap, it should really be a little more expensive. It's nonsense because, last night I talked to a retired couple, and they were talking about their power bill. When their power bill goes from $150 a month to $180 a month or $200 a month, that makes the difference as to whether or not they can stay in Montana close to their grandchildren or whether they have to move somewhere with cheaper utilities, cheaper housing prices, cheaper everything. And I want those people to be able to stay in Montana, and I know you do too.
Yeah, that's the correlation I'm making with everything, is that, the electric prices might be what they are. But let's be honest, the average Montanan does not have opportunity to have a $150,000 a year job.
Right.
That power has to be as absolutely cheap as it can possibly be in order for them to sustain themselves here. Because we don't have the industry we used to have back in the 80s and late 70s, early 80s. A lot of that industry is gone. And so are those jobs, those good paying jobs. And so we have to have, the lowest rates we can get when it comes to energy in order for us to even kickstart, getting these industries going again. I mean, that's really the biggest thing we're looking at. What's it going to take to get money into the pockets of Montanans and get that Rockwell household back. Right. I mean, I think that's really what we all want. We want to get that Rockwell household back. And
it's not even so much, James, getting the money back into their pockets. It's letting them keep the money that they already earned to put in their pockets. Letting them keep that money and stop nickel and diming them with property taxes. I know you're a staunch advocate for fiscal responsibility, keeping our property taxes low, keeping our sales taxes at zero, keeping our income taxes low, moving towards a flat tax. You've been a leader on that, and I think that's one of the reasons that you're such a great candidate for the House of Representatives in Montana. I know that you care about energy prices. I know you care about housing prices. But the way to do it and the way to get cheap energy isn't to rely on federal subsidies. The way to do it is to let people keep more of what they earn by enforcing the laws that we already have on the books. And that's what I aim to do when I come to the Public Service Commission, is enforce the laws that we have on the books and make new rules and partner with friends in the legislature. I certainly hope you'll be one of the members of the Energy Committee, and partner with people to come up with new ideas for how we can make the delivery of energy to households in Montana more efficient and more affordable.
Well, I plan on, looking further into the co-ops, because whatever they're doing, it's working.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's really what's in the best interest of Montanans,
Mm-hmm.
is to look at these models that the co-ops are doing versus just the big corporate, for-profit conglomerate, like Northwestern Energy.
Well, and I'll tell you, because the co-ops are not regulated by the Public Service Commission of Montana, to me, and the co-ops are doing a relatively good job in the limited space that they're in, and these big monopoly-owned utilities are regulated by the Public Service Commission, supposedly. But frankly, I don't think the Public Service Commission's been doing a very good job of doing that regulatory responsibility. So, the staff there is outstanding. I know because I worked side by side with them at the Public Service Commission. We have an outstanding staff there. But what we have had is an uneven, I'll just be generous and say an uneven level of quality from our commissioners themselves. And what I hope to do is to make sure that the commission is up to the task of working for the people of Montana.
And that would be absolutely wonderful. I've been telling, the voters in my district that just because I'm going, running to become a legislator doesn't mean I know everything of everything. And I think a lot of times the people do look to their political figures to, be the Einstein of the topic. And but really, I think what it boils down to is who you're surrounding yourself with, where you're getting your information from. And I look forward to keeping you close as bills and things present themselves, and so that we can chart a good path for Montanans to move forward and keep this power as inexpensive as we possibly can, because we know that that's the number one thing that's going to help Montanans rise above.
It'd be an honor to work with you, James.
David,
it's been an honor to campaign with you and be an honor to work with you.
Yeah, I look forward to this.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.